My name is Leah Lefkowitz, and I am interviewing Lindsay Chattel, soon to be Williams, for Georgia State University's Women's March on Oral History project. The date is February 12th, 2017, and the interview is taking place at Lindsay's home in Washington, D.C. Okay, to start off, where were you born and what year?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1988.
Can you describe your family's political leanings?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that. Over the course of my life, my mother's political leanings have changed quite a bit, and I actually asked her about that when, through discussions about the recent election. And she was very much kind of appalled by our candidate, Donald Trump, who's now our president. And I knew that in the past she had voted for other Republican candidates. So I asked her a bit about that, and she shared that, at this point in her life, she definitely leans more towards the liberal. And what's driven her to that place is, she described going from a mindset of, what would be best for her and her family towards a mindset of what is best for everyone. And I think, especially in this recent election, we've seen that Donald Trump certainly does not stand for what's best for everyone. So my mom now leans more liberal. My dad has pretty much always leaned liberal.
Have you been involved in political activities in the past? If so, describe them.
I have in a few different cases. So what comes to mind for me is I used to be a middle and high school math teacher, and I taught at Ivy Preparatory Academy in Gwinnett County, a suburb of Atlanta. And when I taught there, my school became jeopardized by a House bill in the Georgia legislature. And that bill, if I remember correctly, was trying to take the power away from a committee that at that point was able to approve of charters in Georgia. And I worked at a charter school, actually the only all-girls charter school in the Atlanta area. And I went and represented our school and the voices of the young women who I taught when that House bill was on the floor. So I spoke to some of the representatives that day and just tried to kind of influence them in their decision to approve or not approve of that bill. So that comes to mind for me. And then also, after I taught, I was on staff with Teach for America in Atlanta. And, we saw, of course, and have seen over the past several years, a rise in police brutality within Black communities, most often. And that is an issue that, as a white woman, doesn't directly affect me as much. I get pulled over and I don't fear for my life. But I found that for many of the people I was working with and for the students who the teachers I coached taught, and for my students, my former students, that issue was one that definitely touched home. So I didn't participate in any marches, but I did attend some community meetings and saw my role there as really one to be an ally as much as I could be, and to listen and to stand for stand against, really, the deaths of so many Black men in our communities. So.
Have you participated in a march before? If so, describe them.
Yeah, as I said, I haven't participated in a march. Those different instances of advocacy are really the ones that come to mind, but I haven't marched before.
Why did you march on January 21st?
Well, several things. I think January 20th was a really sad day. And a sad day for many groups of people who I wanted to stand with. But I also felt compelled to march this year because I gave birth to my first daughter. And I think being a part of the masses of women on that day was so empowering to me, but also for her. So, I felt compelled to be a part of that moment in history really for her, and to allow her the opportunity to be a part of that moment in history too. And in all honesty, having at that point, a 5-month-old, she was the reason I wanted to be there, but also part of what at some moments made it seem like it might not be possible. And other reasons why I marched were how well organized it was. I looked up the logistics and found that there were lactation stations all along the route. And I was like, oh, this is possible for us. We can actually be there. And living in the Washington, D.C. area, it was feasible for us. It was convenient. So I think that was part of what allowed us to be there that day. And glad we made it.
When did you move to Washington, D.C. from Atlanta?
I moved here with my now husband in late May of 2015. And we moved here because I got a job in the area that I was excited about, and I'm still in that role. So we've been here now coming up on 2 years.
Great. Which march did you attend? So, sounds like D.C. And why did you choose to attend that particular march? Because you said you were from Atlanta, but you are now living in D.C.
Right, yep. So, it was really just a matter of convenience to me. We actually were visiting family in Atlanta not long before January 21st. So if we had been in Atlanta at that time, we would have attended the march there. But being here, living in this area, and then also being in town at that time made it possible for us.
So you talked a little bit about how the logistics helped you get there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, about how going with a baby worked?
Yeah. So anything with a baby takes a lot of planning. And, with her, I'm breastfeeding. So there's an element of convenience there. I don't have to worry about having a place to prepare a bottle to travel with her. So that's helpful. But I also knew it was going to be super packed, and when I found out there were lactation stations, it put me at ease. I knew it would be possible, because if I had a place where I could go and feed my daughter, then that meant we could be there. Another, aspect of convenience is the transit here in DC. Public transit is quite advanced compared to Atlanta, I would say. DC certainly doesn't have the most elaborate transit, but it's definitely a tier above Atlanta's. We took the metro from the town where we live, Silver Spring, just north of DC, and rode into DC for the march. And we actually chose the stop to get off based on the location of the lactation stations. So in planning our travel to the march, I knew that by the time we arrived there, my daughter would need to eat pretty quickly. So we arrived at a metro station that was close to the first lactation station along the march route, and the first thing we did when we got off the metro was find that. And actually, the process of finding the tent that was set up was kind of emotional. So we get off the metro and we take the elevator up to, ground street level, and it was packed. I mean, there were people everywhere. I think, there were so many people, it was even hard to tell, where the march was. It was really hard for the march to follow the route that was originally laid out because there were just people everywhere. And we kind of had to sneak our way around people, and I was there with my husband, my daughter. I was carrying her in a front carrier at the time. He carried her part of the way, and I carried her part of the way. And then we also went with a couple of friends. One of my friends who also has a daughter just a month older than mine, and then a friend of hers came along also. And both my friend who has a daughter and I needed to feed our babies. And so we're kind of muscling our way through the crowd, and we get to a point where there was someone kind of holding back the pedestrian traffic so that other people could get through. And I was talking to some of the other people who were in the group being held back, just asking them if they knew where this lactation station was. And they did. They were like, oh yeah, it's right over there. So we kind of waited a bit for that traffic to come through, and then looked up at the woman who was directing traffic, and she just yelled out, lactation, and we go, yeah. And it was just such an incredible moment. As a new mom, it's so important to me that I'm able to feed my daughter and provide her what she needs. And at that moment, it was like the collective energy was all directed towards our needs as well. And I think that speaks so much to the energy that was there that day. Everyone was there for everyone, and it was just a really powerful moment to have a complete stranger and everyone in the group around us. It might seem like a simple thing to move out of the way so that someone can pass through, but when everyone's energy is directed towards making sure your child gets what she needs, it was really powerful. And yeah, I think that's so much of what the purpose of that day was, right? Collective energy directed towards making sure that people in our country and outside of our country have what they need. And that's something that our president does not understand. What he understands is what is good for him and other incredibly affluent white men in this country. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. What issue is most important to you? You kind of touched on that a little bit, but if you want to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, there are several issues that touch my heart incredibly closely. As a former teacher of brilliant Black women, I was there to support Black Lives Matter. As the mother of a now 6-month-old little girl, I was there to support reproductive rights of women in our country. As a former wife of a Colombian immigrant, I was there to support immigrant rights. And as a friend of Muslims in this country, I was there to protect religious rights. There are so many causes that speak to my heart, and that I wanted to have a voice to speak up for that day. So it's hard to name one. I think if I had to name one, it would be my daughter and women. But there are so many causes that day, and so many groups of people that day whose voices were so important. So I was there to be a part of that.
A lot of people were there for multiple reasons. That was kind of an overarching theme I noticed as well.
Yeah.
Were there any issues beyond what you purposefully went there for that you saw at the march? Did you feel a particular way about any of those other issues?
There was nothing I saw that surprised me. I think that's kind of at the root of your question. Any signs I saw or groups of people I saw, I was aware of what they were advocating for. So there was nothing really that surprised me on that front.
So you mentioned this is your first march. You've done a little bit of protesting in certain forms, and you talked about kind of why you wanted to participate, but kind of why was it important now to step up? What circumstances had occurred other than, of course, the birth of your daughter and
Yeah, I think the whole reason that this march happened the day after the inauguration of our now president, Donald Trump, I think those are the circumstances really that made this moment so important. What he's done, what he did on the campaign trail, the things he spoke to and against, what he's done in his first, at this point, 25, 30 days in office. It's really shocking to be at this moment, and for it to be so blatantly clear now that there's not only one person who's our president, but there are also masses of people who voted for him who believe in really the oppression of so many groups of people. So I really think that what our new president stands for is the reason why now was the time for so many people to organize and come together.
Before the march, what were you expecting or hoping out of the experience? You talked a little bit about how you kind of prepared for it, but any other thoughts?
Really, I'm someone who doesn't really enjoy being in large groups of people. So I think what I was expecting was this feeling of overwhelm and kind of a feeling of, okay, I want to be here, but I also want to leave. And what really surprised me was the unbelievable calm and peace and just positivity. The energy of the crowd was so incredible that it wasn't a place I wanted to leave. It was interesting. There was this automatic connection with everyone around you. So I didn't feel like I was in a giant mob of strangers. I kind of felt like I was surrounded by friends. And I think that's what really struck me. And to have had that moment where the stranger yelled "lactation station," I think kind of set the tone for the day. But it was just such a powerful experience to be in the midst of so much positivity. And I will say that one of the other things that kind of had me doubting whether or not I should go to the march, whether or not we should be there, was just our safety. I was worried about being in such a big group of people with my daughter specifically, and I was worried about there maybe being violence. You know, I've heard of so many marches going to a place where, you know, crowds are controlled. You know, I think that when we read on the website, it said to bring a bandana in case tear gas was used, and I'm like thinking about how I protect my 5-month-old from tear gas, and kind of pushed aside that fear and went anyways. But after the march, I came to realize that police action was not taken against anyone that day, and it was just unreal to know that, I mean, I felt it when I was there, but unreal to know that everyone was there to be positive and not to be violent, or just not to do anything but stand up and have their voices be heard.
Were your friends and family supportive?
They were. I had talked to my mom the week before the march, and she kind of expressed some regret at not planning to come up and participate with us. And at that point, I wasn't even sure that we were going to go, for the reasons that I named. I was kind of worried about being in a big crowd and the violence and things like that. And so day of, I didn't actually even tell my mom we were going. I didn't want her to worry, because she and I had talked a little bit about how it might not be the best place for a baby to be. And then after, we posted some pictures on Facebook, and I talked to her and told her we had gone, and she just said, you know, I'm so glad you were there. I wish I could have been there with you. So she was really supportive, and other members of my family were too. I'm one of 3 girls, and both of my sisters marched in local marches as well. My older sister lives in Florida, but was in Texas at the time, so she went to a march in Houston, and my little sister lives in South Carolina and went to a local march there. So yeah, I think they were definitely supportive, and I'm sure would have loved to be here for the big national march if they could have been.
Describe the group you traveled with.
Yep, so I mentioned I was there with my husband, my daughter in a front carrier, and my friend Suzanne and her daughter Kova, and then a friend of Suzanne's came as well.
And you took the public transportation to get there.
We did, yep. And actually traveling into the march, so we left a little later in the day. I know a lot of people, so traveling in was actually quite easy. We left later in the day than I think most people did. So, you know, the metro wasn't too packed or anything. And we got there and it was very busy. Traveling back was wild. And getting on the metro on the way back was the first time that we kind of got, we lost some of our friends. So Adam and my daughter Hadley and I were all together, and my friend Suzanne and her friend and her daughter, they were with us, and we were traveling down the escalator to get to the metro, and it was so packed that when we got to the bottom of the escalator, we kind of had nowhere to go. So we were trying to move forward, and people kept coming behind us because the escalator's still moving, and we really had nowhere to go. So we got really packed there, and eventually, you know, they stopped the flow from the top, and everyone was able to get down. But that was the first moment kind of in that very hectic, like, oh my gosh, are we going to get squished moment, that we lost some of our friends and ended up finding them again a few minutes later and were able to get on the train together and everything. But yeah, it was very busy. Public transportation on the way back was wild. But I would also say that was one of the other really powerful moments. Everyone was down there, mobs of people on the platform trying to get on trains, and everyone was like cheering every once in a while. Just a collective like roar would come across the crowd when a new train came, or when the trains left, because then you could see the people on the other side. So it was cool. Yeah.
Do you want to describe a little bit about your fellow marchers, the people around you?
Yeah, the only thing that really struck me was just how positive everyone was. Yeah, I mean, there were all different types of people, a lot of women, but also a lot of supporting partners, men, friends. Yeah, I mean, when you travel anywhere with a little baby, it draws attention. So, but I think particularly in this crowd, there was just an instant connection with the people around us. So.
And what was your, you have a very well-behaved baby. How did she handle in the crowd?
So, yeah, she is incredibly well-behaved. She enjoyed herself that day. I will say, though, it was so busy that when I nursed her the first time in that tent that we found, the lactation station, it was so loud that she was way too distracted to really get a good meal. So it was actually when we were waiting at the metro, they had kind of blocked off the elevators to get down to the metro at the stop when we were headed back home. And she was hungry. So all of a sudden she's kind of, letting us know, getting a little chatty. And at that point, my husband was wearing her in the front carrier. And in that big group of people, I just decided she needed to nurse right then. So it was the first time we'd ever done it, but he's got her on his front in the carrier, and I just stood there in front of her and nursed her. So she handled it really well, but there were moments when it was clear, she needed to feed or had other needs that she let us know about. So yeah.
What were your feelings before, during, and after the march? You talked a little bit about before, but anything about during or after?
I think after the march, there's like this renewed hope to some extent. I think the entire campaign was pretty depressing, and then the election was even more depressing. And to step back the day after the march and realize that the crowds that day were so much larger than the crowds on Inauguration Day just left me with a lot of hope, that people in this country would show up and would believe in human rights in a way that I can only believe will propel our country in the right direction, despite having a president who I know will make that forward motion a little more difficult. So I think just now I feel more hopeful than I felt before.
So you talked a little bit about the atmosphere at the rally and the march. Anything you want to add?
No, really just the positivity was the greatest thing. I mean, some other things that come to mind are like the speakers that there were, and musicians, and it was really just an incredibly well-planned event. You know, it was amazing that everyone was there, for one, but everyone being there and it being so well organized, I think, helped make it a really positive experience. You know, I saw on Facebook after the march that there was this group of women from all over the country who had somehow built this group, and they had practiced a song together, like over the internet, and never knew each other, and then showed up and sang the song. And I didn't see that in person, but seeing the video after the fact, I think again that just speaks to like this collective energy. And there were so many moments like that where you just saw what people brought by being together, I guess. Yeah.
Were there any signs or chants that you particularly liked or remember?
It's hard for me to remember the signs and the chants. I definitely, day of, remember looking around at all the signs, and a lot of them catching my attention. A lot of them are really witty, and I had kind of wished I'd thought of that. Yeah, there's nothing that really stands in my memory. I definitely wish and hope that someone will make like a coffee table book full of all of pictures of signs, because they were great ones, and I'd love to be able to look back at them, but none that really stand out in my mind now.
Same with chants?
Yeah, same with chants. I remember like joining in several chants, but I can't remember what people were saying.
Were you able to hear any of the speakers?
Yes, a few of them. Madonna stands out in my mind. She kind of spoke and sang. We danced a bit to some of her songs. She stands out in my mind mostly because she made one statement that had the crowd kind of like, yeah, something about bombing the White House. But we were like, oh, that's not why we're here. But yeah, no one else.
So day of, you were actually able to hear some of them in person?
Well, yes. So I don't know exactly where they were standing and speaking, but there were screens set up all along the way. So yeah, we were able to hear because, again, like how well organized it was. Yeah.
Did you watch any afterwards, like on YouTube?
I did. Judd. I'm forgetting. Last name Judd. She had...
Ashley Judd.
Yeah, she had like a cool rap that was pretty empowering. Trying to remember if there was anyone else that stood out to me.
Law enforcement, you mentioned that there was no issues. I don't think there were in Atlanta either. Did you interact with them at all? How did they present themselves?
Honestly, I don't remember seeing a ton of police officers. The ones that I did see were just kind of standing there looking around, and if anything, making sure that people were okay. We ran into one woman who was feeling really lightheaded, and it seemed to me like they were there, I'm sure they were there for more than just taking care of the public, but that seemed to be what most of their energy was directed towards, because it certainly wasn't to prevent violence.
What do you think about media coverage?
I didn't really watch a ton of the news following the march. I watched enough to hear that no one had been arrested or no police action had been taken against anyone, and thought that was incredible. But yeah, I didn't watch a ton of media coverage after that.
How did your group manage to stay together?
Yeah. Well, most of the time we were successful at that, and just holding hands as we pushed through the group, making sure we stayed close to each other. My friend Suzanne and her friend had pink hats on, as did many people in the crowd. So you would think that something like that would help, but really they just blended in a bit more. Adam was wearing a red rain jacket, and I think that Suzanne said that, she was able to spot him at one point because of that. But, for the most part, it was just staying really close until we got to that kind of scary moment at the metro where we couldn't stay as close to each other anymore. So, and yeah, at that point, cell phones weren't working either. We had really rough connection kind of the whole time we were at the march, probably just because there were so many people with cell phones in the area, or who knows. But once we were down on the platform at that metro station, there was no reception, and it was just this moment of, and they were kind of depending on us to get them back to where we had come from, because we left from Silver Spring, and yeah, I was worried for them when we couldn't find them for a second, and then thankfully we found them again. So,
describe any moments that stand out.
Yeah, I think really just lactation station moment, nursing my daughter standing, yeah, I think those are the biggest moments that stand out.
Other than when you first got there and finding the lactation station, were you emotional at any other point?
No, I think that was the moment that brought out the most emotion. I think the entire day was really touching. I definitely felt like emotionally present the entire time, but that was really the moment where it just was incredible. Yeah.
How did you feel the day after the march?
Just so glad that we had made the decision to go. I feel like it was a really life-changing experience to be there, and hopefully history-changing moment to have been a part of.
Since then, what other emotions have come in, or thoughts?
Yeah, I think since then, I mentioned like a feeling of just hopefulness. And when I continue to hear about the executive orders that our president is putting into place, or the ban on Muslims entering the country, I try to hold on to that feeling of hope and just like that collectivism that existed that day. Yeah, I think it's a moment I go back to so that I can continue to kind of carry some of that emotional state through the incredible uncertainty and, what I imagine will be a future of many injustices.
How have your family, friends, colleagues responded to you marching?
So I'm the manager of an instructional design team right now. We create education for MedStar Health, which is the largest medical network in the DC region. And I went back to work that next day, or not the next day, the day after, because it was on a Saturday. So I went back to work on Monday, and right now I have 2 men on my team, and 3 women. And we had a team meeting that day, and I asked people, what they had done over the weekend, and no one, like one of my coworkers had been out of town, so she wasn't able to be there, and the other 2 women hadn't shown up, and I was just telling them a little bit about, that I had gone. And as much as I didn't want to get political in that team meeting, or really ever, I did think that it was important to just share from my weekend, like I always would do. And a few of my team members said, oh, I wish I had been able to be there. And then some other people stayed quiet. So, we didn't spend too long talking about it, but I do have a sense that, some people who I work with probably saw that day mostly as an anti-Trump day, which in many ways it was, and in a whole lot of ways it wasn't. So depending on their political, I guess, affiliations or beliefs, I think they respond differently, but several people also stood out to me as just being really excited to hear about it. So,
do you have any plans now that the march is over?
No. Yeah, and even you asking that question kind of prepares me to think about what's next, because I think it's so easy for us to have these kind of like mountaintop experiences, right? Like this big event that we participate in, and that's it. And really, the event should just be a marker of the way we're living our lives anyways. So, I mean, you asking me that question causes me to think about how I continue to be an advocate beyond Facebook posts and conversations. Like, what do I actually do next? I think one really deliberate action would be to attend a Black Lives Matter march, or in some way support that cause. I know a lot of my friends who have been very active were almost frustrated by the huge turnout there was for the Women's March. Because people like myself can show up and say, I'm here to advocate for all of these causes, but if we're not actively doing that all the time, then we really need to question our intentions. So, yeah, I think I need to do some research and figure out how I continue to be a voice for so many people who are experiencing injustices, and will continue to with our new administration.
What do you hope will happen next? What do you fear?
Oh, goodness. I hope that we as a nation will continue to move towards an inclusive society, a society that recognizes the rights of all groups of people, who ensures the rights of all groups of people. What I fear is that we'll move and are moving drastically in the other direction. What I fear is that white dominant culture continues to dominate and does so on the backs of other groups of people. Yeah, I'm really afraid of that. I'm also afraid that there are going to be decisions made that make people's lives so much worse. Women not having the opportunity to choose whether to, move forward with a pregnancy or not. That's a huge, huge burden to put on someone. So, a lot of fears.
Will you continue to support the mission of the march if there's future marches? I think they're thinking maybe making it a yearly event. So it sounds like you probably will. But if not, why not? If yes, why?
Yes, because I think, showing up one day is not doing the work. The work has to be done every day. But I am cautious too, as I mentioned, about just being a part of these, isolated events. If there are future marches, I will hope to be there and work to be there, but I think it's gotta live in what I do every day too. So really defining that, I think, is what's most important.
Did anything surprise you the day of the march? People, speakers, new experiences?
Yeah, Madonna's comment surprised me. I think that was about it. 'Cause, it was just kind of... It wasn't the sentiment of the day, saying that she had been thinking about blowing up the White House. That wasn't the energy that was surrounding us there. So, I don't know. I think everyone kind of got quiet for a second when she said that. But apart from that, I mean, everything I saw was amazing. Yeah.
Do you have any strategies for coping with the current situation?
Surround yourself by incredible people. And also don't shy away from the moments when you can sit beside people you completely disagree with. I think we have to give ourselves those moments where we're surrounded by like-mindedness, because it will power us through the moments I think we're obligated to really impart wisdom, to share from our experience, to let it be known that there's another way of thinking or others to think about. So yeah, I mean, I say all of that hoping that I can live that myself too.
Any final thoughts? Anything that we might not have discussed?
No.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.